Steve, as you notice by the clock on your wall, we are recording quite a bit later than we generally do.
That is true.
And I kind of figured I'd come clean and let you know why that is. And I think you're going to like the story. It all starts a couple of weeks ago when my wife and my younger son, Max, and I were leaving the house. Alex was at work, and Carolyn said, leave the door unlocked because I don't know whether Alex took their keys. And I said, listen, Alex needs to take their keys when they leave the house. This is not a complicated thing. And she says, what if they didn't take their keys and
you've locked out your
lock
child?
Them out? And I say, then if that happens, this is a good time for them to learn a lesson about taking your keys. You need to take your keys when you leave the house because you don't know. I'm not beholden to stick around the house until you get back in.
And as you're saying this, just like J.F. Hunton, is the universe leaning in and listening to you for some karmic payback?
Yes, the fates were saying, oh, wait a minute, take a note.
Hey, Susan, jot that down. Down.
So today is primary election day in Philadelphia, and I was getting ready to go.
April 23rd is primary election day?
Primary election day is today.
For
Tuesday,
what?
April.
What offices?
Like we voted in the primaries. Like we voted for our party's nominee for president.
Like the presidential primaries. Oh, right.
Yeah. As opposed to the Purina Cat Chow primaries. Those are on March 23rd. Everybody shows up.
I invite you to just go straight to hell because here's the thing.
What other primaries are there?
Okay, yes, but first of all, kudos to you for voting in a primary that does not matter. Pennsylvania in April when everybody's got it locked down. Who cares at this point? Why do you need to vote in that one?
Well, okay, there were ballot issues.
Okay, that's different. Okay.
Yep, there were but every time it's important to vote. I show up on every one of those. I show up on every one of those.
You're right. I heard myself speaking and I already hated how I sounded. You're right.
Yeah,
every election matters.
And my younger son Max, this is his first time voting. This is his first time ever.
Fun.
And so he texts down because I was leaving the house. My wife is in Cincinnati for work, and
I'm so sorry to pause you.
Yes.
Where was she for work?
She's in Cincinnati. Now listen, if you go to anybody who lives down there, they will tell you that is where they live. Cincinnati. Cincinnati.
You are pulling a Midwest wool over my eyes. There's no way that it is pronounced Cincinnati.
Call somebody up who lives there and say, hey, where do you live? They'll say Cincinnati.
Cincinnati?
Yes.
How did the rest of the country get that wrong, if that's the truth? And I don't know that you're telling the truth.
Well, they pronounce it like the I, but it's like many of those words, none of which are coming to mind right now, where you don't pronounce it the way it's actually spelled.
Yeah. I mean, it does chap my ass that Italy is actually Italia, and we can't be bothered to say Italia. Yeah. Why do we have to change it?
And don't even get started with Germany, who calls themselves a completely different word. But we're like, no, you're Germany.
Yeah, no, we're going to call you something else. Okay, so you're down in Cincinnati, which that does not sound right, but keep going, okay?
Yeah. So Carol is down there. She texted me last night, make sure the boys remember that today is primary voting day. And so I text them before I'm leaving. They're both upstairs in their bedrooms. And I say, hey, don't forget to vote today. Max says, hey, I've never voted before. You mind if I come with you so I kind of know what I'm doing? I'm like, yeah, get dressed. I'm leaving right now. We leave the house to vote. Along the way, I've got to pick up some stuff at the neighborhood pharmacy, so we take the long way back. And long story short, we get back home. Get up to the door, I turn the doorknob, and it's locked. And I feel for my keys, and I got no keys. And I tell Max, tell me you brought your keys. And Max goes, no, I didn't take my keys. I said, why is the door locked? And Max goes, because Alex probably left for his morning class at Temple University. And I said, oh, come on. Come on. This cannot be happening. Max goes, you don't have your keys? I'm like, no. Max goes, don't worry. I'll text Alex. Maybe they haven't gotten far. And Max texts Alex and says, hey, you locked us out. Dad doesn't have his keys. How far are you away? Can you swing back and let us in? And my son texts without missing a beat. This would be a very good time for your dad to learn a lesson about taking his keys.
Oh, I'm delighted in this. I'm delighted in this that your college-age child is like, this is a learning moment for Dad.
Yeah. Look, you've got to learn. Listen. If I bail you out, you're not going to learn your lesson.
Yeah,
you've got to learn.
This is the only way that Dad's going to learn. He's got to, internalize this. Oh my God, Brad, that is delicious. That is delicious
Yes.
that you forgot your key. By the way, so I'm assuming because you were voting, it was a walking distance away. Do you not have a culture of taking your keys when you leave the house? I'm not being facetious. I'm asking.
No. Can I be honest with you? Without like, hey, everybody come rob my house. Very often, but if I'm just walking like around the neighborhood, I don't lock the door.
Really?
No.
Okay. First of all, kudos to you for trusting in your fellow men and women. But I go out to my car and I lock my house. No, not really. But you know what I mean.
In fact, there's been quite a few. Again, I shouldn't say any of this, but there's been quite a few days I wake up in the morning, come downstairs, and realize that nobody remembered to lock the front door. Because I mean, it's something that is a good habit to get into, but it's not that. We live in a perfectly safe neighborhood.
Do you think that's the Midwest in you? And it's like, I don't need to lock my doors.
No, yeah, I'm coming right back. Oh, and I'll tell you what it is. Not for nothing. If somebody did come in, we got nothing worth stealing. There's absolutely nothing in there that is worth stealing. They would come in and they'd feel sorry for us and leave some stuff on their way out.
You know what? Here's a $5. Just get yourself something nice. Get yourself some lunch.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. And on that note about the financial status of cartoonists, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellogg, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a reminder to everybody that we are going for 500 pals over at patreon.com/comiclab. That's for my birthday. So if you are on the fence, oh boy, I cannot emphasize it enough what a good value it is, because you're getting 300 plus episodes of previously hidden to you Comic Lab Pro Tips episodes. And the whole Discord server, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and if we get to 500, we are going to reward you with a couple of new episodes of Drunk Comic Lab. That's when Dave and I pour a couple of tasty adult beverages and start telling all the stories that we're too smart to tell when we are otherwise in full control of our senses. All the good stories come out on Drunk Comic Lab, and we've got we are absolutely raring to go for another couple of episodes, but only if we get to 500 Patreon backers.
Absolutely. So let's jump into our first question this week. This comes in from Tom, and it says, "Hey guys, Tom here. In my comics, I often show every moment as if it were a shot-for-shot remake of a movie version of itself. While it's good to look at, I can't help but think I'm not writing for a comic properly. Not compressing enough time, maybe. I could cut the heck out of the script, but I'd lose some good shots and some character stuff. So should I write differently or just find a way to get more out of the door faster?" Brad Geiger, this is a question about editing, about compression, about letting a scene breathe. How do you know, Brad, how much to write?
So here's the deal. This person's really coming to us with kind of one of those fundamental questions of writing. And the answer is, well, hold on. I'll give you your answer right here. You got a pen?
Yeah.
Got a pen? Here it is. So when you're writing your script, you've got to have 3 pages of intro. Then the next 2 pages are conflict. And then the next page is 1 page of world building, no more. And then 3 pages of character arc. And by the way, you can already tell this is ridiculous.
I was going to say, it took me a minute, and then I was like, wait a minute, what's he doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because here's the deal. if anybody tried to give you a step-by-step recipe for your writing and how just exactly how much of this and how much of that, you'd tell them to go jump off a bridge, right? Because nobody can answer this question. The really frustrating, disappointing answer to your question is you have to learn this by building your writer's aesthetic, which is just as important as an artist aesthetic that we keep talking about on the show. And that comes from reading things and experiencing things and consuming other media and building your sense of what's good and what's bad. And then going back and looking at some of your old stuff or looking at your stuff after you've been away from it for a little while and saying, okay, how did that work out? How do I feel about this? Did this work? Did this not work? The two ingredients that you really need don't have anything to do with page count. They're aesthetics and reflection. And being an honest judge of your own work. That's the only way that you're going to get to where you're going here. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the advice that you're looking for exists. Like, how do I know if I've got too many details? Because if you've got a good writer's aesthetic that you've built up by reading great things and by reading horrible things, yes. Right? It's both of which are important. And if you give yourself some time to separate from that thing that you wrote and then come back and look at it objectively, those are the only ways that I know of that you can answer that question for yourself.
I mean, yeah, Brad's answer is very strong there. I will come at it from a different tack because I think I have two answers for this, both of which are kind of unsatisfactory, much like Brad's, but in a good way. My answers are cruft and my answers are subjectivity. And so let's talk about cruft first. So one of the classic things that you hear from any writing teacher ever, whether it's an essayist or a novelist or short story or a tone poem, no matter what you're writing, they'll say, cut out the cruft, right? They'll say, is this necessary? Is this scene necessary? Is this dialogue necessary? Does this description of the room have to happen? Does it add to the story, right? Yeah. Or is it cruft? Is it like extra? Is it like filler? And here is the thing, is that there can be within two very different artists wildly divergent definitions of what constitutes cruft. For some person, those details are the story. It's the reveling in the world building or the reveling in the background of the characters or the reveling in their dialogue. That's what makes it so fun, right? And so, like, for example, two characters arguing about a Royale with cheese and whether or not that's a Burger King. Like, for another writer, that might be like, well, this is useless. This adds nothing to the story. Why are we get to the murder, get to the solving of the mystery, all that sort of stuff. And the other writer would be like, no, you need to know that these characters are capable of murder, but also it's critically important to them to define what a Royale with cheese is, you know?
Right.
Like, that's a character defining moment for that writer. So what I'm getting at too is it leads me into my second point, which is subjectivity. And that is that two different writers can have wildly divergent answers for how to do this. And the way I can visually represent this is with interior design. You can walk into, say, a grandmother's living room, and it's got the knickknacks, and it's got the cat with the little tail clock that goes tick, 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 and it's swinging back and forth. And it's got a bunch of
curio cabinet full of precious moments.
Yeah, I was
going
to say precious moments, little ceramic dolls or lladros from Spain, or it's got a bunch of plate collections. Like, oh, here's the plate when the president was oh, here's one from what time I went to Yellowstone. Remember, Brad, when plates were a big deal in the 80s? You know?
Oh yeah, I always used to let and my grandmother would leave her upper plate out, and we'd say, "Put that back in your mouth, old lady."
But okay, so you can picture that living room, and also there's flowers everywhere, and paper flowers and plastic flowers, and like unnecessary. And there's also 7 cats, right? The aesthetic is very. You can imagine that room, and for her, it's the perfect room. She feels comfortable there. She feels joy there. When she walks into the room, it lights up her day, right? Now imagine there's a guy. He lives just outside of Berlin. Totally spare white walls, completely white floor, a single black couch, a single black lamp. lamp, right? And then two paintings, both of which are blank, and they're hung on his wall. And he's like, "Welcome to my house. It's filled with joy," and you're like, "What is this interior design?"
Yeah.
Both of those.
And the only plate that he's got is a lithograph over there of Edward Munch.
Yes, exactly. So what I'm getting at there is two wildly divergent attempts at interior design, both of which bring the owner joy. So now apply that to writers, right? You can see a writer that revels in the details, all the unnecessary stuff and gets on sidetracks, gets pulled away to unnecessary stories or asides. Douglas Adams, as a humorist, writes like that, right? Mm-hmm. Or you could do very clear, crisp. I'm trying to think of who is more crisper and cleaner. Steinbeck, maybe? I don't know. But a writer that gets...
Or Hemingway.
Actually, Hemingway's better, yeah.
Very sparse writer,
Yep. So both of which are valid. Both of which, by the way, valid not only to the writer, but valid to the reader. Like, I could love to dive into some silly, nonsensical, filled with asides and useless writing. And I could also love to dive into sparse writing, in the same way that we all have varied musical tastes. So to Brad's point, the only unfortunate truth in all of this is that really only by doing and by consuming a lot of writing and then putting that to practice in your own writing again and again and again, do you come to find how much writing is right for you.
Yeah. And listen, I do recommend going back and reviewing some of your old stuff, right? You can the more you build your aesthetic, the more you're able to see it when you're making missteps, and the better you'll be at identifying a mistake as you're making it the next time, right? And also, I mean, it's one thing I've been thinking about more and more, Dave. We had a question a while back. Do we use beta readers? Right. And novelists use beta readers all the time. They have a small group of people they really trust to do that. I still don't know whether it's a good fit for me, just because I know me too well. And I just know my creative process, that I don't know that that's a great fit for me. But I also know that I am not everybody, as much as I would love that. But maybe beta readers is something. Couldn't you imagine the delight of a world full of Brad Geigers? Just everybody staying in their house.
That's like a Twilight Zone, a world of Brad Geigers. Oh, my God. All of them mad at the other ones that they've left the keys inside the house, All of them mispronouncing Cincinnati. You don't know which one to turn to for advice,
and then the one Dave Kellett on the block says, "Why don't you just have a hidden key somewhere?" And I'm like, oh, my God. If I could only have a hidden key.
Genuine question as a friend. I love you. I know your house was built before the war, right?
Yes.
So So built before the war, there's got to be nooks and crannies where you could very cleverly hide a key.
All over. So my wife is uncomfortable with the idea of hiding a key, so there is no hidden key. We talked about it. Here's
a trick, though. You don't have to hide it on the property. You could go like a block away to a park and have a very specific tree and have a little hole with a can in it or something.
It's not a bad idea. I don't know. Well, listen, after this, I'm going to, what we do have is the in-laws. So my in-laws live maybe a dozen blocks away, and they've got a spare key to the house. So the plan, if we didn't catch Alex, was for Max to go down there and to lie through his teeth, because here's out of all the reasons I love my sons, sometimes they show such an amazing side of themselves. Max goes, "Listen, if we can't get a hold of Alex, the in-law, Graham and Grandpa have keys." And I go, "Okay, yeah." He says, "Don't worry." He says, "I'll tell him that you're at the studio, that I'm alone, and I'll just go and get it myself. Nobody's going to bat an eyelid that I screwed up." But if we tell him that you're here, you're never going to hear the end of it. And he says, "I'll just take the hit. He says,
You know what?
do it for
kindness.
me.
You've raised a good person. Yeah, I'll take the hit.
Seriously. And so that was what he was planning on doing. He's like, I'll just tell him that you're gone. It's no skin off my nose. They'll razz me a little bit, but it'll be nothing. But he says, if it's you, you'll never hear the end of it.
Oh my God. I love too that in your mind, you're like, I've raised a good person. This is a good heart. Meanwhile, he's calling a family meeting without you to talk about dad's forgetfulness. You know, they're like, guys, we all need to get together to talk about this.
Well, it was similar because I'm like, I was touched. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful child. This is great. He gets and meanwhile, he says, well, here's what I'm going to tell him. Bop, 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 bop. And I think to myself, this kid is a little bit too good at lying.
I was gonna say, well,
like he had an amazing story all set up.
So, okay, so they just voted for the first time, so they must be 18, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so you can't tell me that they don't know how to break into that house. Or did they just not want to tip their hand that they knew how to break into that?
Maybe not. The other thing was we've got a shared deck, or a portion of our back deck is shared. And the other thing is I think I left that door unlocked. So we could have let the neighbors, if we could have got their attention.
I am so mad at you from Los Angeles. You leave your back door unlocked and you leave your front. God, I'm going to call you one day and they're going to be like, I'm so sorry. Brad's been murdered. I'm so sorry. Brad has been murdered.
The deck is raised off the ground. You'd have to get a ladder to get up there and get in through the back door.
Okay, one bit of advice. Okay, you're at home. You've left all your doors unlocked. You're standing there nude in your living room, and a robber comes in, and he's got a sawed-off shotgun. You have no weapons aside from flaccidity to attack them with, and so all you could... Here's my advice. Just confuse them with the word Cincinnati. They'll be like, what? That's not how you pronounce it. And then you run. Then you run.
Run the other way.
Flappa down the street. You just run down the street. That's your one weapon. All right. Well, anyway, so to answer your question, Tom, I think the truth is in the doing. And that I know that is an unsatisfying answer in a lot of respects. Obviously, yes, cut away cruft. Obviously, yes, use time as your editor, as Brad would say. I had a comic just this week that I felt pretty good about, but I'd happened to be that I got called to dinner and I was like, you know what, I'm going to leave this till tomorrow. I came back down the next morning into my studio, fired up the Cintiq, and I was like, oh, this is all wrong. This is no. The better way to do it is this. Time was my editor. So not immediately publishing is a great move. Asking yourself after you've done with the script, but you haven't yet drawn yet, is this necessary? Does this add to, in any meaningful way, into either enjoyment, character development, story development, plot, scening? And if it doesn't, maybe cut it out. And if you're finding that your inclination is that you might be writing too much, that might be that your aesthetic is about to level up or is leveling up.
Yeah.
And you're realizing, oh, I've been writing too much. It's time to get back a little bit,
Right. No, I think that's great advice. And I'm just going to underline that if I can. Time. I having been doing comics on the web since there was a web, one of the things that I see over and over and over again from amateur and pro-am comics particularly is they're so hell-bent on getting that next comic out. And they think that they've got to get the next comic out for social media and for any number of other reasons. And back in the day, because we really needed to do daily updates just to keep people's attention. But you get so hell-bent on getting that next comic out, the next page out, staying on the treadmill, that you're not taking enough time to distance yourself from what you've done, take a look at it cold, and really judge it objectively. And that's advice we come back to so many times on this show. We know that you're probably not listening to it. We know you're probably not going to do it. We know from ourselves that it's really hard to do, right? Yeah. It's so easy to sit there, but even making myself do that is a challenge. I've done a very good job of building it in the last several years, but even getting to that point was really difficult because I had to change the way and I also had, like right now, I had to do stuff like this. I just finished a chapter, and for the next 2, maybe 3 weeks, my website, my social media will effectively go dark as I prepare the next chapter. right? I won't be posting any new things. I won't be posting a whole lot on social media. I'll be concentrating on getting that next chapter outlined and figured out the major plot points. It won't be written line for line. We've talked about how I do that in a previous episode, but it'll be outlined, right? And then I'll start working with the idea of being at least 1 or 2 weeks ahead with what I'm writing before I actually sit down to start working on those. That's so I can get a couple weeks in between the writing and the sitting down and doing, so that just before I start that page, I've got a little bit of distance, and I can give one last look at that and say, what does this need before I actually sit down and do it?
Right.
Does it need to be there at all? Does it need to be changed? You've got to build that in to your process. You've got to build time and objectivity into your process. And that's not new advice. It's advice that we've given time and time again. But we also know that it's advice you're probably not going to take because in some cases, because your mindset's not there yet, and you're stuck on this treadmill idea. And in some cases, because it's just really difficult to do.
Yeah. But I not having anything to add to that, I will just say that that it's satisfying seeing how your writing will improve with time and effort and as the years go on. And the fact that you are questioning this is a good thing. It means that you are, like I said, I think you are either leveling up or about to level up. And it can be painful at first, but it's also a wonderful thing. But anyway, Brad, before we go into the break, I have one quick question. Speaking of history, this is sort of a historical question that came in from J. Lark. And the question is, hey, Brad and Dave, what is a zine? I keep hearing this word tossed around by indie comic creators and short fiction authors, but I don't know what the word means. I gather it has something to do with self-publishing. Is it related to the word magazine? Is this just some hip new lingo that kids today are using? Or should I be doing zines? I don't understand. Best wishes, Lark. So, Brad, we have a couple minutes before the break. This can be a quick one, I think. What is historically a zine, Brad?
Interestingly enough, a zine is webcomics from the 1970s. And there's an absolute parallel to that, because what happened in the early 2000s is this new technology came along, the internet, that allowed us to publish without gatekeepers. That's the whole thing. That's what a zine was in the 1970s. The new technology was photocopiers, and that photocopying technology becoming more accessible. And that's exactly what people did in the 70s. Instead of trying to get their stuff picked up by a magazine or a newspaper, they would use that new technology to do their own magazine. Now, should you do a zine? That's up to you. That's your decision. That's a decision.
I'm going to chime right in and say, no, you should not do a zine. But yeah, Brad's being kind about it.
I was trying to be nice. But here's what I would suggest. And again, talking about advice that we give almost every week on this show. Do a cost-benefit analysis. And if you do, here's the cost-benefit analysis that I did to decide that I didn't want to do a zine, right? I took the amount of time that it's going to take to produce and design and physically copy these zines, right? And that's a lot of time that you're putting into that. Even if you're just taking stuff that you've already done and published, you're still laying that out. You're still taking it to the copy place. Now you've got to go and there's the physical expense of having that printed. Now you got to go someplace where you can sell these things, right? And that's either going to be selling them on consignment at a comic shop, which we've talked about what a bad idea generally selling on consignment at a copy shop or a comic shop is, or go to a comic convention or a little street fair. But that's also money for tabling fees and time that you're standing there with these photocopied zines in your hands, and you're going to sell those for, I don't know, a couple bucks a throw. I don't know how you can't charge a whole lot of money for a photocopied zine. You just can't. And the profit margin on that is incredibly slim. So for me, just for me, I'm not saying this is how you should think, but for me, when I add all that up, I see a lot of wasted time. I see and by the way, unlike publishing on the web where you can reach a very wide audience, you're reaching a very narrow audience. And for me, I don't see the upside. It's not something that I'm going to pursue because trying to build a career in comics and like most of us, if you've got a day job, you've only got a certain amount of time. You get sidetracked with doing a bunch of this nutty shit that doesn't bring you back anything. You can't sit there and wonder why you're not further along in your hopes and desires when you're wasting this kind of fucking time. So but again, I can't tell you what to think. But for me,
after you just called it nutty shit.
For me, this is why I am not going to do it. Dave, what do you think?
Listen to that Zen master at the end there. I don't find it's worth my time, but if you want to do this nutty shit, go ahead. I'll tell you what.
You want to throw your life away? Don't come crying to me.
Let me give you a historical lesson from my own life. I was a youth when zines were kind of having their second coming in the late 80s and 90s, right? Mostly in New York, but they were also in LA. And I was going to school near Chicago, and they would trickle down to my college campus. Anyway, usually zines were printed under 1,000 copies. That was the thing. Mm-hmm. Very rarely offset, mostly, like Brad said, photocopied or some version of photocopying. Never a margin of profit, always a margin of like, well, we stumbled along enough to make the next one, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
By the way, there is a really good collection of zines at Ohio State Cartoon Art Library that Jay Kennedy donated to them. So if you happen to be going there, you could check it out. Anyway, I just want to say that all these were still around when I was in college, and you could get zines and buy zines for $1, $2, $3. I want to do my one-act interpretive dance of how everyone reacted in the cartooning world when the internet came along and they no longer had to make zines. Here's my one-act play. You ready? Oh, thank God! What is this Netscape thing? I'm going to learn this so quick because within an afternoon, you could reach more people than you could with your zine. It cost you less money, and it was just so much easier and more. The distribution was easier in terms of a wider people and all over the world that could be like-minded, and you could track people, or you could get to people with your right psychographics and not based on your geographics. And so the internet was just way better than a zine could ever be. So now I will counter Brad with one thing to say, well, why would anybody want to make a zine now? I will say, if you don't yet have the wherewithal to make a book, an offset book or a print-on-demand book, sometimes, I just want to say, Brad, sometimes there is a slight value in putting together a short story for a zine just to see how your book reads as it flips page to page. There is sort of an instructive value for that. In fact, I remember SPX many, many moons ago, I believe Raina Telgemeier had an early version of Smile, if I remember correctly, as a zine. Or if not a zine, what do you call them? An ashcan?
Ashcan.
Yeah, ashcan.
Yeah.
An ashcan is basically a zine, but the zine was more like a collection of 30 things, and an ashcan was basically a short story. Anyway, so there is a value in trying out your story in print, even if it's quickly photocopied or whatever have you off a printer, a home printer. I don't see a tremendous value, but I could make an argument that there's some value there, Brad. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's value to standing outside in the rain and watching the raindrops.
Bradley J. Geiger.
No, I seriously, I'm not hot on it for me.
Yeah.
But besides being silly and funny, if it's something that you want to see how your stuff looks like in the real world, go nuts. Listen, there's worse things to go out and do.
Exactly. I just want to reiterate one thing that Brad said, and it's the most succinct point you could put on everything to do with zines. Yeah. You're going to spend $1.50 to make $2. That's what's going to happen with the zine.
Yeah.
And so it's just not, unless you're just doing it for shits and giggles, it's not really worth it for your time or your money. A zine has such a small margin that you might as well just make up stickers, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Well, Dave, it's time for us to answer another question from one of our Patreon backers. This one coming in from Travis, who says, "Salutation, my Comics Kings."
Hey.
Are there some... Yeah, I like Comics Kings. Comics Uncles was always nice, but King is always a little bit better.
Because you know what? No matter what you do, there's always a creepiness factor to the word uncle. I don't know why. I don't like it. Well, though, maybe we give off a creepy vibe. Maybe
maybe we're getting what we deserve. Who knows? Well, this is the question. Are there some good shortcuts to make equal spacing for gutters consistently? I'm using Photoshop for the record. Thanks, Travis. So the question is making gutters at the same width and to do it consistently from strip or page to page all throughout your career or throughout a book. How to keep those gutters consistent? What's your advice?
Okay, so I'm going to give 2 bits of advice on this one. And one is sort of how to figure out what is a potentially good gutter width for you. And then the second one is how to do that consistently. So the first one that I will recommend, and this is not a hard and fast rule from one of your Comics Kings. I'm trying that out. I don't know how it fits. Comics. I don't want to say comics. Anyway, I'm trying this out. Let me just say. I'm going to start over again. Good God. All right. So one way that I would suggest figuring out a gutter width, a gutter depth that might work for you is to take one of your capital letters that has full length on its risers and its length there. Maybe like a capital I or a capital M. Turn it on its side and use the width of a capital letter for the gutter between panels. Or if you're going vertically, keep it totally straight and just use a capital letter as a guideline to how deep your gutter should be. I generally find that that's a workable solution. However, it's imperfect because some people have huge font sizes in the way that they either write and vice versa is true too. Some people have ungodly small fonts in their comics. But as a general guideline, it's a good place to start. You can at least use it as a baseline that if you always know you always have a 16-point font and it's always this font in your comic, then it's always 1/3 bigger than that. Well, at least you have a baseline on how, if you ever lose your files and need to start fresh, it's a little bit bigger than your capital M on your 16-point font. Then the second thing I will recommend is that for consistency's sake, I'm a big proponent of having something templated. For example, in Sheldon, I draw it by hand. It's ink on paper. But every day I do my digital pencils and I build my digital pencils off a template. So I have it sort of pre-divvied up on different layers of this is how 4 panels would look. This is how 3 panels would look, 2 panels, 1 panel, 5 panels, all that sort of stuff. And all of them have a consistently held gutter width. And that way I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It's just there, bing, bang, boom, I'm done. And then for Drive, it's digital, easy peasy, building off a template or of a previous week's strip. I'm ready to go. So I don't have to, basically the trick is you want to remove cognitive load in trying to figure out every time how big your gutter should be. So a template is my kicker. Brad, how about you? What advice would you have for this one?
Well, my advice would be I switched to Clip Studio Paint in 2016 and I set a gutter width in the settings and I haven't thought about it ever since. So every time I make a gutter, it is exactly the same size.
Is that true? That's something that it does?
Yes.
Oh my God.
It's automatic. And if I'm putting inserting a panel in, it'll snap to the correct gutter width. I literally I couldn't tell you what my gutter width is because I literally haven't thought about it in almost 10 years.
It's just so much better of a software program, isn't it, than Photoshop?
It really, for making comics, it really is. And I say that knowing full well, and seriously, I'm not even going to try to convince you to move because you've been doing comics in Photoshop for such a long time. It would really be detrimental to somebody like you to say, okay, now do it in a different software. But I am going to tell Travis, who just started recently, that you should absolutely be switching to Clip Studio for this reason and a whole lot more.
Yeah, so Brad in friendship has tried to convince me multiple times to switch to Clip Studio. And as he said, like if I were sort of starting out, I would do it. But it's been 25 years with some version of Photoshop in my cartooning, 25 years. And so it's so hard when you're that enmeshed into it all through the process, not just creation, remember, but creation, then applying it to web and creation, then applying it to final printed files. I can't tell you how nervous I would be to create Clip Studio files and doing Drive Act 5 and just fingers crossed that I didn't mess up some key thing in the process, because I switched programs. So I know that when I finish Drive and it's 1,000 or 1,200 pages and they're going to be like, oh, wow, and he made it all with Photoshop. What a dipshit, but it is like
nobody's going to say that.
Do you remember how old you were, Brad, when you first heard that Shakespeare's actors, none of them got the full play? They only got scraps of paper with their lines on it. And you're like, how did you do a play?
I remember exactly how old I was. I was 55 years old because it just happened.
Well, okay. So like when I first heard that, I was like, how the hell did they do a play if you don't have the script with everybody else's pieces in it? You only have your pieces to memorize? It just seemed like a bonkers way to do a play. And so like, I know when I get done with Drive, people are going to be like, God, he did it with Photoshop? There was Clip Studio. Why did he not use the Clip Studio? It's just because that's the way I did it. And that's the way I always did it. And it was so hard to shake it once I had established it. But so, okay, Clip Studio literally has a setting that says, this is the gutter width and
this
set
is
it
the
and
gutter
forget
width.
it.
Yep.
And can you, if you need to do, say, a Webtoons type thing where you want to have very spaced out, for mood, very spaced out paneling, can you adjust it on the fly, or is it tricky?
Yeah. You can literally just pull them apart.
Oh my God.
Snap back. They'll snap back together if you pull them, together. But once you get it outside of their gravitational pull, you can make it whatever you want it to be.
Sweet bacon and eggs. That's so much easier. So I'm going to change my answer to say switch to Clip Studio.
Now, one thing I got to say, because again, you see this in Pro-Am comics all the time. The default gutter width for Clip Studio is way, way, way too thin. It's too close. It's too skinny. Okay. The default that comes with Clip Studio is, in a word, wrong. And you've got to overwrite it. You cannot use their default. They're way too close. All right. They're skinny gutters that don't do you any good. So once you do switch to Clip Studio, Travis, the first thing you're going to do is overwrite the default. And then, as long as we're talking gutters here, Dave, this is always something that I don't know whether this is like comics conventional wisdom or it's just my own personal aesthetic. But let's say you're setting up a page of comics, because this doesn't affect comic strips that much, but a comic page, it does. And of course, you've got the vertical gutters that are separating your panels. And if you've got 2 rows of comics panels, you've got to decide at the outside, are you going to let those gutters line up, or are you going to keep those gutters from lining up? If you decide to let them line up, then you've got to stick to that grid that gets set up by lined up gutters. You got to stick to that at least for the entire page, if not throughout the book, because it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. My preference is to make sure that those vertical gutters do not line up with the gutters underneath them or over top of them. I don't like lined up gutters. So I make sure I put lots of time into making sure my gutters do not line up. Yeah. So if you're confused about what I'm talking about, the all-time king daddy example of this is the Dr. Manhattan.
Watchmen. Watchmen had 9 panels.
The Watchmen.
But it had a variation of that, right? If I can jump in. So it was always, the standard of a Watchmen page is 9 panels, but it was really clever because they could combine sort of panels to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 1, all of which depended on how many of those 9 panels they combined. So it made for so you could have 3 rows of single column or single panel comics. You could have 3 of 3 and have 9 on a page. You could do, there was all sorts of, like flip through a Watchmen. And once you see it, once it's pointed out to you, you're like, oh, this is really clever.
And the important thing to remember there when we're talking about that is that all of those vertical gutters line up to form a grid. In other words, if you're just looking at that white space, all of those line up to form a grid, and the grid can't be broken or else it'll stick out like a sore thumb, compositionally speaking. So once you make that commitment, you're committed for at least the page or for the book. The gutters have to line up. And on the other hand, if you don't have the gutters lining up, then you can't let just one gutter line up in one space. Like you've got 4 panels up in the upper right-hand corner, and those the gutters between those line up. It's going to direct all of your attention towards that, right? Because our eyes are built to notice patterns, and it's going to be super distracting. So my own personal way of looking at this is you've got to make a decision with gutters if you're going to do a comic book page right on the offset. Are you going to let them line up? If so, keep doing it consistently, or are you going to not let them line up? And then you've got to be very careful that one of them just doesn't slip in on you. Yeah,
and I will echo a couple things with Brad. Is that, boy, do I co-sign the idea that if you're going to have them not align, you have to have them sufficiently not aligned that there's not some kind of weird tangency. If you do have them aligned, you have to stick to it. Otherwise, it's like that one bathroom tile that was lined up wrong in a bathroom full of aligned tiles, and it drives you nuts every time you go pee. You're like, geez, Louise, who did this tiling? So also, you have to know that depending on which route you pick with your guttering, that sometimes can impact the story in the sense that if you have many different sizes, shapes for panels, that can sometimes mirror the energy of a story such that like it reinforces the chaos or the fact that a panel takes the space it needs, kind of a thing. Whereas if you have really rigid storytelling, it kind of implies the omnipotent hand of the artist on the story of you're going to get what you get and you don't get upset, but you're going to get it in an orderly way. There is an aesthetic to having very specific grid patterns in your paneling and your guttering versus having it willy-nilly, both of which are valid, but just that it does a little bit impart, like color, like line art, like tone, it does a little bit impart onto the story itself, even something as seemingly inconsequential as how you gutter, how you panel. I will ask you this, Brad. Do your vertical gutters match your horizontal gutters in size?
Oh, yes. So that's another aesthetic thing that I'm always fascinated by. The answer is yes.
Me too.
Absolutely. Yep. The width of the vertical gutters is equal to the width or the height of the horizontal gutters. You'll notice in a lot of manga, that is not the case. The vertical gutters tend to be skinny and the horizontal gutters tend to be wider, which is a valid look. It's a valid aesthetic. It's not for me. I don't choose that. I don't find that beautiful for my work, but I see it being done elsewhere. And it's like, okay, fine. That's a different choice. But it is, again, something that when you're setting up a page, you got to think to yourself, okay, how do I feel about this? Because the one wrong move is inconsistency.
Yes.
If you do it inconsistently, your pages are going to look amateurish right off the bat. And you're going to be in trouble. So you got to decide how you feel about it. If you decide equidistant gutters like I do, great. If you like manga gutters with the skinny verticals and the thicker horizontals, fine. But you just can't mix those up.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because we started off by saying, because I like to give sort of general guidelines as to how to do a thing in comics, because so many younger cartoonists don't have it. And one of the things that I like about Nate Picos with lettering is he gives sort of broad guidelines that you can apply to very different styles of lettering, right? Yeah. So let me ask you, I sort of gave the capital letter on its side as a potential width thing for your gutter. How would you try to define? Because another way you could do it was to say maybe 2 or 3 times the width of your border is the width of your gutter. You know, something like that could be a good guideline so that it's not too big, not too small. But how would you, maybe that's not a good rule. How would you try to lay it out for a young cartoonist?
Yeah, because when you were talking about the cap height, I was trying to think whether that was a good fit for me, and I'm not sure whether it was. But I'll tell you what I did is I eyeballed it. I did a page of panels with nothing in them, and I kept adjusting them until it looked right to me. And that's not helpful. That's to anybody else.
No, that's very helpful. Noodling is a huge part of figuring out your aesthetic, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, you know, you could tell when it was too thick. You could tell when it was too thin. And then I kept just edging it along and adjusting it. And then when I found something that I thought looked graceful and also did what a gutter needs to do. And remember, a gutter is there for a reason. Gutters are super, super important. And I know, by the way, there's lots of people that like to experiment with gutters and not have gutters, and they'll have the panels squished right up against each other. And Again, the calm Zen Brad Geiger is going to tell you that's not for me. That's not for me. And if you're just starting comics, I'm going to encourage you to not do that until you really understand the medium of comics by doing it for a couple, 2-3 years, because there's just a lot going on there. Gutters having a super, super important reason. So I made sure that mine were thick enough to do the job without being too thin to let those panels collide, or so freaking thick that it was ridiculous. And once I found what worked for me, I set it, and then I never thought about it again, you know, because unless, of course, I looked at it going back to the first part of the show, if I were to at some point look at it and say, hey, these panels aren't working in an objective cold light of day, then of course it's time to go back and adjust. But once I set it, I never came back to it. It was done.
Yeah, and I think I just want to co-sign Brad's idea of noodling until you feel it in your bones that it's right is a totally valid, 100% historically valid way for a lot of cartoonists to do it. I want to say 2 other things, and then I'm going to leave the point. One is, you have the immense benefit in figuring out your guttering that you are not the first cartoonist to ever live. And here's what I mean by that. Go flip through all your favorite manga, all your favorite comic book collections, all your favorite Marvel, DC, or Image comics, all your favorite graphic novels. See what paneling visually feels right to you. You're like, I like this. Okay, now here's what you do. Photocopy it or take a quick scan on your camera, blow it up to whatever size you draw in at Photoshop. Just use that exact same ratio, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. No one will ever know. No one will ever care. I will tell you that I took Bloom County and I took Calvin and Hobbes. I blew them up. I said, I don't really like Calvin Hobbes' height. That ratio was wrong, but I like its guttering and I like his lettering size. So I took that. Bloom County, I didn't like the lettering and I didn't like the guttering, but I loved the height of Bloom County, so I took that. Anyway, steal from other art cartoons, steal from me, steal from Brad. We don't care. Take another cartoonist that you really enjoy the visuals and the ratios for, blow it up, use the same damn thing. That's number 1. Number 2, I will tell you that when it comes to guttering, sometimes too perfect a gutter can feel cold and impersonal if you're doing line art in ink. So for the vanishingly small number of us that still do line art with ink, I will say this: rulering a gutter or a border or a panel can work perfectly fine. I did it for 15, 20 years. It's fine. And no one's going to complain. No. But if you want to give a little more life, a little more zhuzh to your art, do your penciling of your border with a ruler, but then do the actual borderline with a hand-drawn line. You will get better at your straight lines if you do it for a couple of years. And also, the slight imperfections add a beautiful human touch to a hand-drawn comic. I cannot say it other than my own aesthetic really responds well to an imperfectly drawn, but based on a perfect square border panel. So just try that out if you're drawing with ink.
Yeah. Yeah. The bottom line is that the panel border should mesh so much with the art that it becomes invisible.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The idea is for this to be a comprehensive, cohesive unit. There's this one cartoonist. I'm not going to call him out at all. I'm not even going to tell you what he writes about. I will say he's a really funny writer. But he does this 4-panel comic, and he's got very much a Bloom County style art, but he uses a very thick gray panel border. Doesn't match anything else. It's way too thick, and it's gray. Okay, it's to the extent that you immediately start paying attention to the panel borders. They're distractingly bad. Right. And he's he's so good. I'm like, I want to just like send him telepathic messages saying, dude, you're overthinking your borders. Just a black border. Come on, figure this out. Because it's to my aesthetic, it really, really looks bad. Anytime that you're distracted by a border, and it also tells me he thought too much about his border. I'm gonna be the guy with the big, thick gray borders. It's like, no, how about you be the guy that writes really great stuff that we like to read? Nobody ever in the history of comics said, oh, Phil, you got to come here and read this comic. It's got great borders. Nobody's ever said that.
Yeah. I want to really underline the thing that Brad said, because he nailed it perfectly what I was trying to get at, way better than I did, which is that you want your border lines to disappear and to mesh in with the artwork, whatever your style is. So for me, I think one of the reasons why I respond so well to a hand-drawn in ink border is because that matches a hand-drawn Sheldon or Arthur or one of my characters and my lettering, right? It all works together as a family. So to Brad's point, if you have a more digital vectory look, then a vector panel is super appropriate because you want it to mesh in with the artwork. So yeah, I think Brad has the perfect capper for all of that.
Yeah, that's important. That's very important. And it's kind of along with the theme of today's show, which is the importance of building your own personal aesthetic. But, and that takes time. This is once more an aesthetic issue. So, Dave, we've got time for one quick question. I think we can zoom this one in real quick. I think you might disagree, but I think this is an easy layup for us. It's about distribution. Comes in from one of our Patreon backers. Dear Brad and Dave, you awesome comics dads. I like that too. My question is about increasing my distribution. Right now, I distribute to local comic shops by printing my books and driving them over myself, and by using Drive-Thru Comics and Indie Planet to provide access to out-of-town folks, but I'd like to get bigger. Is Diamond still a thing? What should I be looking at if I want to grow? With huge thanks for all you do, Michael. So, Michael, we're going to talk to you about distribution.
We are going to talk to you about distribution, but I'm going to start by saying that it's like when all the Muppets are headed towards Hollywood to try to figure out how to make a career in TV. I don't know that you want to be the one Muppet going to New York to try to break into public television, in the sense that distribution largely is a very broken system, and we'll give you advice on how to do it, but the money to be made and the living to be made that Brad and I so often advise is direct sales and direct cartoonist to consumer sales, whether it be in Patreon or Kickstarter or on your own website or at Comic Cons or at book fairs or this or that signing, that anytime you can cut out a middleman, you have a higher propensity of being able to make a living from your comics, because every time you introduce a middleman, in this case a distributor, you immediately have your income or a third your income, or it's always some terribly high number that we can get into in a minute. So in general, broad strokes, Brad and I will most likely advise you go direct to your readers via your site.
Yes.
Not so much through a distributor. But now, having said that, let's talk about Diamond for a minute, Brad. What's our current status on Diamond? Does it exist anymore? How is it doing? How's everything going on? Or is it about Diamond?
Diamond does exist. It still distributes to comic shops.
Sure.
There's also a competitor to Diamond called Lunar that exists. And the whole idea there is they will buy your stuff for 60 or 65% off the cover price and then list it in their catalogs, and comic shops can buy them. My own personal sense of the comic book shop a landscape is that they're still struggling quite a bit to stay in business. Although I've seen a lot of them pivot really strongly to middle grade graphic novels and get quite a bit of bump out of that.
And very often the ones that are successful also have really done a nice job of incorporating everything Magic the Gathering. Like we'll have games, we'll have D&D things, we'll have right. You know what I mean? So it's comics adjacent, even if it's not comics, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Perfectly valid business model. But just be aware that that's what's happening a lot in the industry. Yeah, keep going, Brad. Sorry to jump in.
Right. And also going back to previous advice, printing your books and taking them to comic book shops, that's called printing or that's called selling on consignment. That, again, going back to that idea of a cost-benefit analysis, typically, I do not personally recommend that. I don't think for the amount of time, and also I just don't. It's not very successful of a business endeavor to sell on consignment. You're constantly checking back. Did you sell one of my books today? Nope, still didn't sell one of your books. Okay, I'll check next week. You're constantly checking in. There's not a big profit there. It's not great. So I'm going to encourage you to stop that as quickly as possible. Unless you're doing gangbusters over there selling on consignment, it's probably a big waste of your time. So Diamond, I'm not really going to recommend, neither Lunar, and I really think you might take for yourself a good hard look at the cost-benefit analysis of selling on consignment. What does that leave? Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think it leaves? It leaves only the biggest bookstore on the planet, Amazon.com. And the good news is you can set up a seller account on Amazon.com. I think the one that I would suggest is Amazon Advantage, which I think the URL is advantage.amazon.com. You can set up, there's also Seller Central, which is set up a little bit differently. I don't know that I'd recommend that quite as much, but it's also there for you if you need it. You can set up an Amazon account very quickly. And unlike the old days when it was clear when you were dealing with a independent publisher on Amazon because it literally looked different, these days it's impossible to tell the difference between you listing your own stuff and a publisher like Scholastic listing their stuff. All right, you can. Right. In other words, you are going to have every bit of a chance of selling your book on Amazon as anyone else does. It's going to be the same deal as Diamond would have given you. I think Amazon buys those books for 60% off the cover price. It is, by the way, technically consignment in that you don't get paid until they sell a book, right? And all of the other things are exactly what you're going to get with distribution, in that you're on the hook for the mailing costs of getting it to their warehouse. You only are going to sell things to Amazon when they start to see orders come in, and they're going to start getting some of them on hand at their warehouse. The bad news is you're probably not going to set the world on fire. The good news is that once you've done it, it's there. You're in the largest bookstore in the world. You have nothing stopping you from selling your books if your stuff is something that somebody wants to read. You've got everything there. It's way better than trying to get your stuff into comic shops. And by the way, it's where everybody is going to, 80 to 90% of your potential customers are going to default to buying at Amazon. It's where you need to be, quite frankly,
right.
Along with selling it on your own store and things like that. So you spend an afternoon, you get your stuff, your account set up on Amazon, you get ready to sell your stuff. And when the orders come in, you fill them. And I think that's the answer to your question is spend an afternoon, get set up on Amazon, and give a hard, cold, objective look to the cost-benefit analysis of some of these other things that you're doing.
Yeah, and I will help flesh out some of those cost-benefit analysis for Amazon, which is I'm on Advantage.amazon.com, and I don't necessarily recommend it. I will be completely honest. My business is healthy and robust, and last year I think I sold $500 worth of books on Amazon Advantage, $700. Like nobody's setting the world on fire. And yet, what a hassle it is to have to fulfill books to Amazon Advantage. You have to do this very specific 15-step process.
That is true.
You would think that Amazon would be efficient in their pre-ordering for certain books since it's on commission, yet I'll have an Amazon warehouse in Ohio order a book and then send it back 3 weeks later. And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what's even happening? I'm on the hook for damage to and from. I'm on the hook for shipping. So let me just put some bare numbers for you. A Drive hardcover, a beautiful Drive hardcover I'm super proud of. You buy it on my website. I ostensibly, the cost of goods sold are covered by the Kickstarter. I ostensibly make $55 when you buy a Drive hardcover from my store. If you buy a Drive hardcover from Advantage on Amazon, they immediately half it. So they're taking, $27? And I get $27 of that. But then also it costs me $4 to $5 to ship it, just media mail, nothing special, $4 to $5 media mail. So now I'm down to $24. And then 1 out of every 10 to or from Amazon gets destroyed or dinged or banged up in a way that I can't really sell it. So you roll in that 1/10 cost for that book to the other 10, and you see where I'm going here is that it's a way better business model for me to frankly sell less books at a way higher margin, almost 100% margin when you stop to think about it, on my site than it is to sell it through Advantage. So you might be like, well, Dave, why do you do it then? I'll be honest. A lot of decisions in life sometimes coast. Like you made the big push for it, and then once you're on it, you're like, I'll just leave it up. It's fine. I do make $500 to $700 on it every year. But also, there is a vanishingly small number of, say, Australians that want to get a Drive book. When I ship it, I have to charge them what it costs me to ship it, $40 or $50, right? But for Amazon, they have a 747 or an A380 cargo plane going down to Amazon or to Australia every day, probably 5 times a day. So their cost for shipping to an Australian customer sometimes can be 5, 6, 7 Australian dollars. Not bad, right?
Yes,
and so for that reason, I just point Australians. I'm like, just get it on Amazon. That's fine. You'll get cheaper shipping through them than you would through me. And so that's part of why I do it. But the answer is I don't really need distribution. The younger me wanted distribution as a form of validation, Brad. I tried Diamond. Didn't really like it. It felt like the technologies from 1970s. Everything felt like you got to fax a document to a woman named Ruth, and she's 98, and she's sitting at an old desk in a room, which kind of wasn't far from the truth with Diamond. Yeah. So that was Diamond.
Was horrible.
I tried Ingram because I wanted to get in with librarians, and I was like, oh boy, I just want to be in libraries. Wouldn't that be cool if I could be in libraries? And unfortunately, for a lot of libraries, they have to buy through distributors, the 1 or 2 that their district approved. So I would often go through Ingram. Here's the thing, you make no money when you sell to libraries because they're buying it at a library price, which is sometimes as low as like 25, 30% of cover price, sometimes. Or at least that's the money that would get to me. So I got rid of Ingram. I got rid of Diamond. Did I try any other distribution? There were other like smaller I tried smaller like upstarts distributors, Brad. Like, hey, I only distribute 100 comics and cartoonists, and when you're in with family, right? And like, okay, great. Like everything in life, it's a little bit cattywampus. It's not run very efficiently. It's everyone's doing their best, but so I got rid of that. Here's the thing: the bottom line is, I make my living because I sell directly to my customer, and the same is true for Brad by and large. So yes, you can try distribution. We do not generally recommend it.
No. Well, listen, as we're wrapping up the show, it leads us to a question I've been meaning to ask you.
Sure.
You and I both were experimenting with Kindle Direct Publishing. How's that experiment been going on your end?
I mean, it's like a wet fart at this point. It's not. It was a lot of, and to my great credit to my wonderful assistant Beth, she did all the heavy lifting to get those books on Amazon. And because Amazon is currently under a wave of AI submitted books, right? Kindle is swamped with false and fake and near fake books and frankly just crap books. So it was so hard for us to get our valid Sheldon and Drive books up because the system kept kicking them out. And we're like, listen, we are human beings. We are submitting a real for real book. And so we finally got them up. And I think, Brad, I'm making $11 to $15 a month on Kindle Direct. It's nothing. It's nothing. So as soon as I get to the 6-month point that I'm allowed to put them back up on my Shopify site, you bet your bippy I'm putting my ebooks back up on my site, where I at least make, I don't know, $500, $600, $700 of ebooks on my site. Not a lot, but it's a little extra scratch. I don't recommend Amazon Kindle Direct at the end of it. How about you?
Same thing. You said it was like a wet fart, and I can only underline that. That was you're making more money than I did. Although I will say you put up a lot more books than I did.
I went big. It was not worth the effort. It was, here's the thing. Brad and I talk about you have to have a lot of legs under the table, and part of it is, guys, you have to experiment kind of constantly with new ways of making money. Maybe this would have worked out. And if it had worked out, super passive income for Brad and I, right? You put these ebooks up, bada bing, bada boom, you're making $100, $200, $300 a month. Didn't work out. It's not a lot of money. So it did, however, give me incredible insight into how much music, YouTube, and books are being swamped by AI submissions right now.
Yes.
I did not quite have a grasp on how bad it's already gotten, and Amazon is getting murdered by AI submissions to the point where they've limited it to you can only submit, Brad, 10 books a day. Well, who the hell is writing 10 books a day that's not AI, right?
Yeah, and these all seem like solvable problems, but the problem there is if you've ever tried to get anything done with Amazon, they don't have any actual people working for them either.
No.
The problem is half of their all the bots, but if you've ever tried to get a hold of somebody on Amazon to solve a problem, you know that doesn't exist either.
No.
They've got chatbots working for them and all this other stuff. So we started the show with somebody being hoisted on their own petard, and we're going to end the show with Amazon being hoisted on their own petard because, God damn it, they brought this on themselves.
Yeah, they really did. And I suppose being swamped by AI was not the end that I anticipated for Amazon, but who knows? If that's what brings them down, I guess that's what brings them down.
So much the better. And with that, I get to tell you that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my delightful and never forgetful friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Ink at evilcomic.com.
And my good friend, who hopefully one day will accompany me to a personal appearance at a comic shop somewhere in Cincinnati, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
I do remember when I was going to school in Indiana college, someone said, hey, do you want to go down to Cincinnati? And I was like, sure. We drove down to Cincinnati, and my reaction was literally like, well, it's a place. It's a city. I was like,
there it is.
Cincinnati. Not a lot of there in Cincinnati.
No. Actually, right now, Carolyn is actually staying in Kentucky and walking across the bridge to Cincinnati. And
stop saying Cincinnati. I refuse to accept that.
Hey, I didn't correct you when you said Indiana.
I will say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the guy who's got the key to our heart, Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. And hey, keep giving us those 5-star reviews over there on Spotify. You are absolutely helping us get that show out to more and more people. And if you do, you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And for all of our listeners who are currently living in Cincinnati, for more reasons than I care to explain, I'm sorry. I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we will go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/Comic Lab. Someone in Cincinnati angrily stopping the podcast.
Yeah, that's it. I'm not listening to these guys no more.
Yeah. Brad, I've got the perfect place for you to hide your key. I know exactly where you can hide it. No one will ever find it.
Yeah, where?
Cincinnati. There's no one there. No one's actively going there. No one ever wants to visit.
Nobody's ever going to find it.
No one will ever find you. Leave it right in the town square with a little sign that's saying, "This is my key." No one in Cincinnati will find it.
And if I had to be faced with the threat of going to Cincinnati every time I lost my keys, they'd always be in my pocket.